Plasma cannons scorched the void of space to ash as the Lemnorian warships unleashed hell on the human battlecruiser. But to the shock of all, the humans didn't die. For centuries, the Lemnorians had terrorized the galaxy, conquering and enslaving countless worlds with their advanced weapons and merciless tactics. No one dared stand against them, but now, in the distant reaches of the Orion sector, a lone human battlecruiser faced down an entire Lemnorian fleet, refusing to back down. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Uko sneered at the holographic display of the human ship. His exoskeleton was covered in scars from 100 battles, and his piercing green eyes radiated contempt. He had expected an easy victory, a chance to crush the upstart humans and remind the galaxy of Lemnorian might. The Lemnorian ships unleashed a barrage of plasma, confident it would vaporize the human vessel, but impossibly, the human ship evaded the onslaught with blinding speed. Before the Lemnorians could react, the humans retaliated. A volley of immense kinetic projectiles shot forth from the battlecruiser, impacting the Lemnorian shields. The shields crumpled like tissue paper. On the human bridge, Captain Lawrence Grant barked orders to his crew. He was a grizzled veteran, a killer of Xeno's threats for decades, his close-cropped grey hair and cybernetic right arm testaments to a lifetime of brutal warfare. "Target their weapon systems and engines," Grant commanded. "Precision shots, disable them." The human gunners complied, their advanced targeting computers locking on with uncanny accuracy. In a matter of moments, the mighty Lemnorian warships were reduced to drifting hulks, their weapons offline, and engines crippled. It was a humiliation Uko had never known. As the human ship prepared to jump away to safety, Uko slammed his fist on the arms of his command chair, splitting it in half in a rage that no Lemnorian had seen in centuries. This could not stand. He would have his vengeance on the humans and their upstart captain. The galaxy would learn to fear the Lemnorians again, no matter the cost. A new war had begun, one that would shake the very foundations of the universe. The terror of the galaxy had been challenged by the fearless might of humanity. And the Lemnorians would stop at nothing to put the humans in their place, under their spear tip and whip. But humanity would not kneel, would not cower, no matter the odds. They would fight to their last breath against the Lemnorian menace. The battle for the fate of the galaxy had begun. In the aftermath of the devastating human victory, Uko's ship limped back to the heart of Lemnorian space. His fleet was in tatters, his pride shattered, but his rage burned hotter than 1,000 suns. He would have his revenge, no matter the cost. As his battered flagship docked at the orbital ring around the Lemnorian homeworld, Uko marched straight to the Galactic Council chambers, his exoskeleton still scorched from battle. The heavy doors swung open, and he strode into the grand amphitheater, his footsteps echoing on the polished marble. Representatives from a dozen alien races were already deep in heated discussion, their voices rising in a cacophony of anger and fear. At the center of the chamber, hovering above the central podium, was a holographic display of the human battlecruiser that had humiliated the Lemnorians. "For this cannot stand," Uko roared, slamming his fist on the podium. The chamber fell silent as all eyes turned to the seething Lemnorian admiral. "These upstart primates have challenged the order of the galaxy. They must be put in their place." Murmurs rippled through the gathered aliens. Some nodded in agreement, their own fear of the humans plain on their faces. But others looked uncertain. "The humans have shown remarkable ingenuity," said the ambassador from the Turians, a spindly insectoid race known for their mercantile prowess. "Perhaps there is opportunity here for trade, for growth." "Growth?" Uko spat, his eyes narrowing. "I will show you growth, the growth of human heads on Lemnorian spears." The chamber erupted into shouting once more, the councillors arguing back and forth. But then a hush fell over the room as a new figure emerged from the shadows. She was clad in a billowing black robe, her face obscured by a deep hood. Pale, ethereal hands emerged from the sleeves, and she raised them for silence. "I am Zara," she said, her voice soft yet commanding. "I speak for the Kylox, the unseen ones who have watched this galaxy since the stars were young. Ukko leaned forward, his interest piqued. The Kylox were spoken of only in legends, a race so ancient and advanced that they had transcended physical form. If they were involving themselves in the war, the tide could quickly turn. "I have an offer," Zara continued. "The Kylox will share a fraction of our technology with the Lemnorians. Weapons beyond your imagining, ships that can dance between stars like motes of dust in the wind. But only if you can prove your worth." "Name your price," Ukko growled. "The Lemnorian Imperium will pay any cost for victory." "Defeat the humans in a battle of our choosing," Zara said. "Prove you can wield our gifts and they shall be yours." Ukko's mandibles twisted in a vicious smile. With the weapons of the Kylox at his disposal, the humans would be crushed like insects beneath his heel. He would see their worlds burn, their people enslaved. Captain Grant would kneel before him, begging for mercy that would never come. "I accept your challenge," Ukko said. "In the name of the Imperium, the humans will fall." As the council session ended and the representatives dispersed, Ukko stalked to his quarters to begin plotting his revenge. He would select his finest warriors, his most powerful ships. They would train day and night until they were honed to a razor's edge. And then, when the time was right, they would strike without mercy. But in his arrogance and his rage, Ukko never paused to consider why the Kylox had chosen to involve themselves, or what price they might demand for their aid. He was a weapon, a blunt instrument of war, and all that mattered was the destruction of his foes. In the shadows, Zara smiled to herself, her pale eyes glinting beneath her hood. The game was afoot, and the pieces were in motion. The humans and the Lemnorians were but pawns on a board that stretched across the stars themselves. And in the end, it would be the Kylox who emerged victorious. Back on Earth, Captain Grant was rushing through the halls of a top-secret military base, his boots pounding on the polished floors. He had been urgently summoned by his superiors, and he knew it could only mean one thing. The Lemnorians were on the move. As he burst into the command center, he was greeted by the sight of General Hartman, a grizzled veteran with a face like weathered stone. Hartman was hunched over a holographic display, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Captain Grant," Hartman said without looking up, "we have a situation." Grant snapped to attention, his cybernetic arm whirring softly. "What's the problem, sir?" Hartman gestured to the display, which showed a map of the border between human and Lemnorian space. Red dots were clustered on the Lemnorian side, massing like angry hornets. "Our long-range sensors have detected a massive buildup of Lemnorian forces near the border," Hartman said. "Intelligence suggests they're preparing for a full-scale invasion." Grant's blood ran cold. After his victory against Ukko, he had hoped the Lemnorians might think twice about attacking human space, but it seemed his actions had only stoked their fury. "What are our orders, sir?" Grant asked. "We're going to take the fight to them," Hartman said. "We've identified their main staging area, a heavily fortified outpost called Forge Base. Your mission is to lead a strike team to infiltrate the base and destroy it before the Lemnorians can launch their attack." Grant nodded, his mind already racing with strategies and tactics, but Hartman wasn't finished. "To ensure the success of this mission, we're assigning you a team of our best and brightest," he said. He tapped a button on the display, and a series of personnel files appeared. "Meet Sergeant Jake Stevens, callsign Stonewall," Hartman said, pointing to the image of a hulking man with gleaming cybernetic enhancements. "He's a master of heavy weapons and can take a beating that would kill an ordinary man." Grant studied the file, impressed by Stevens' combat record. The man had single-handedly held off an entire battalion of Kravak raiders during the siege of Proxima Centauri. "And this is Corporal Amir Patel, callsign Ghost," Hartman continued, indicating a slim, dark-eyed man with a face that seemed made for shadows. "He's an expert in stealth and infiltration. He can get in and out of places that would make a ghost look clumsy." Grant nodded, already seeing how the team could work together. Stevens would be the hammer smashing through the Lemnorian defenses, while Patel would be the scalpel, slipping in to sabotage critical systems. "When do we leave, sir?" Grant asked. "Immediately," Hartman said. "Your ship, the USS Phantom, is already being prepped for launch. It's a state-of-the-art stealth frigate, equipped with the latest in cloaking technology and electronic warfare suites. You'll be able to slip past the Lemnorian defenses and hit them where it hurts." As Grant saluted and turned to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this mission than met the eye. The Lemnorians were fierce warriors, but they had never mounted an invasion on this scale before. What had changed? And why now, so soon after their humiliating defeat? In the bustling hangar bay, Grant found his team already assembled, checking their weapons and gear with the easy efficiency of veteran soldiers. Stevens was a mountain of a man, his cybernetic arms rippling with barely contained power. Patel was a ghost, slipping in and out of the shadows as if he were born to them. "Captain," Stevens said, snapping off a crisp salute, "ready to kick some alien ass, sir." Grant returned the salute, a grim smile on his face. "Damn right, Sergeant. Let's show these Lemnorian bastards what happens when they mess with humanity." As the team boarded the Phantom, Grant couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. These were the best of the best, the most skilled and deadly warriors humanity had to offer. With them at his side, he felt like he could take on the whole Lemnorian Imperium himself. But as the ship lifted off and rocketed towards the stars, Grant had no way of knowing that there was a traitor in their midst. Zara, the mysterious Kylox emissary, had infiltrated the Phantom, disguising herself as a human soldier. Her goal was to sabotage the mission from within, to ensure that the Lemnorians emerged victorious. As the Phantom hurtled through the void, Grant settled into his command chair, his eyes fixed on the viewscreen. The Lemnorian base loomed ahead, a sprawling fortress of black metal and pulsing energy shields. "All right, people," Grant said, his voice steady and calm. "Let's do this, for Earth, for humanity, and for every poor bastard who ever had to face down a Lemnorian in battle. Let's show them what we're made of." The crew responded with a roar of approval, their voices echoing through the ship. But in the shadows, Zara smiled to herself, her pale eyes glinting with malice. The humans had no idea what they were really up against, and by the time they did, it would be far too late. The USS Phantom glided through the void, its cloaking field shimmering like a heat haze. On the bridge, Captain Grant leaned forward in his command chair, his eyes locked on the viewscreen. Forge Base loomed ahead, a sprawling fortress of black metal and pulsing energy shields. "All right, people," Grant said, his voice calm and focused. "We're going in. Stonewall Ghost, you're with me. We'll take out the power core. The rest of you, hit the command center and find out what the Lemnorians are up to." The team snapped into action, checking their weapons and gear. As the Phantom slipped through the base's perimeter defenses, Grant felt a surge of adrenaline. This was what he lived for, the thrill of the hunt, the rush of battle. The ship docked in a hidden hangar bay, and the team split up. Grant, Stevens, and Patel moved through the corridors like shadows, their footsteps muffled by the hum of machinery. But as they neared the power core, all hell broke loose. Lemnorian soldiers poured out of hidden alcoves, their plasma rifles spitting death. At their head was Uko, his exoskeleton gleaming in the harsh light. "Did you really think you could sneak into my base undetected, human?" Uko sneered, his mandibles clicking with malice. Grant didn't waste time with words. He charged forward, his cybernetic arm whirring as he unleashed a flurry of blows. Uko met him head-on, his own strength enhanced by his exoskeleton. They traded blows in a brutal dance, fists and feet crashing against metal and flesh. Grant could feel the heat of Uko's plasma blade as it sliced through the air inches from his face. But despite Uko's superior strength, Grant refused to yield. He had a mission to complete, and he would see it through no matter the cost. As they fought, Stevens and Patel pushed forward, blasting their way through the Lemnorian defenses. The power core loomed ahead, a pulsing mass of energy that thrummed with barely contained power. Meanwhile, the rest of the team breached the command center, their weapons at the ready. But what they found inside was not what they expected. The Lemnorians were not preparing for an invasion, but for a desperate defense. Holographic displays showed a massive fleet of unknown ships approaching Lemnorian space, their weapons primed and ready. "What the hell is that?" one of the soldiers breathed, his eyes wide with shock. Before anyone could respond, a shimmering figure materialized in the center of the room. It was Zara, her pale skin shifting and rippling as she revealed her true form. "Foolish humans," she hissed, her voice dripping with contempt. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into. The Kylox have returned, and they will crush all who stand in their way." With a wave of her hand, Zara sent the soldiers flying, their bodies crashing against the walls like ragdolls. The room erupted into chaos as the team fought desperately to survive. Back in the power core, Grant and Uko continued their duel, their bodies battered and bleeding. Grant could feel his strength waning, but he refused to give up. With a final desperate lunge, he managed to knock Uko off balance. The Lemnorian stumbled, his plasma blade slicing through the air wildly. Grant saw his chance. He charged forward, his cybernetic arm unleashing a blast of energy that sent Uko flying. The Lemnorian crashed into the power core, his body convulsing as the energy tore through him. The core began to overload, its containment fields failing. Grant knew they had only moments before the whole base went up in flames. "Fall back," he shouted, his voice hoarse with pain and exhaustion. "Everyone get to the ship now." The team raced through the corridors, dodging plasma blasts and falling debris. They could hear the base tearing itself apart around them, the screams of dying Lemnorians echoing through the halls. As they reached the hangar bay, Grant saw Zara standing in their path, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "You may have won this battle, human," she said, her voice cold and mocking. "But the war has only just begun. The Kylox are coming, and they will not rest until every last one of you is dead." With that, she vanished in a burst of light, leaving the team to race aboard the Phantom and blast off into the void. As the base exploded behind them, Grant slumped in his command chair, his body aching with a dozen wounds. He knew that this was only the beginning, that the true threat was still out there, waiting in the darkness of space. But for now he allowed himself a moment of triumph. They had struck a blow against the Lemnorians, had shown them that humanity would not go down without a fight. And as the Phantom raced towards home, Grant knew that whatever came next, he and his team would be ready. They would fight to their last breath, would give everything they had to protect their people and their way of life. As chaos erupted in the command center, Grant and Uko's battle raged on, their fierce struggle taking them into the heart of the base's power core. Pulsing energy fields cast eerie shadows across the grated metal floors as the two warriors clashed, sparks flying from the impact of armor against flesh and metal. The whirring and thrumming of the immense power core reverberated through Grant's bones as he dodged a vicious swipe from Uko's plasma blade, the heat of the weapon singeing his skin even through his armor. Uko pressed his advantage, his exoskeleton-enhanced strength driving Grant back with every blow. Grant's muscles screamed in protest as he parried and blocked, his cybernetic arms straining against the Lemnorian's relentless assault. Just as it seemed Uko would overpower him, a blast of plasma scorched the air beside the Lemnorian's head. Stevens charged into the fray, his heavy plasma cannon roaring as he fired shot after shot at Uko. The Lemnorian warlord roared in fury, turning to face this new threat. Grant seized his chance. Lunging forward, he landed a devastating punch to Uko's midsection, the force of his cybernetic fist crumpling the alien's armor like tin foil. Uko staggered, his plasma blade slipping from his grasp. Grant pressed his attack, raining down blows until the Lemnorian collapsed, his exoskeleton sparking and twitching. With Uko neutralized, Grant and Stevens turned their attention to the power core. They raced across the walkways, dodging the arcs of energy that crackled from the unstable core. Grant's mind raced as he calculated the best way to sabotage the core, to cripple the base and halt the Lemnorian invasion before it could begin. Suddenly his comlink crackled to life. It was Patel, his voice strained and urgent. "Captain, do you read me? We've uncovered the truth. The Lemnorians aren't our real enemy. They're just puppets. It's Zara's people, the Kux, Patel said, his breath coming in short gasps as if he'd been running. They're an ancient race, and they feed on the life force of other species. They've been using the Lemnorians, manipulating them to weaken us for their own purposes. Grant's blood ran cold. The implications were staggering. If Patel was right, then this war was just the beginning. The Lemnorians were just the first wave, softening up the galaxy for the Kux's main assault. He stared at the pulsing heart of the power core, his finger hovering over the control that would overload it and reduce the base to atoms. But if he destroyed it now, the Lemnorians would be crippled, left defenseless against the Kux. Grant clenched his fist, his cybernetic knuckles creaking. He was a soldier, sworn to protect humanity against any threat. But now, faced with this terrible choice, he wavered. Doom an entire species to save his own? Or spare the Lemnorians and risk unleashing an even greater danger on the galaxy? Time seemed to slow to a crawl, each second stretching into an eternity. Grant knew he had to act, had to make a choice. But what was the right choice? What was the cost he was willing to pay for victory? For survival? His comlink crackled again, Patel's desperate voice echoing in his ear. The soldier was saying something, pleading, but his words were lost in a burst of static. The power core shuddered, the walkway beneath Grant's feet trembling. He could feel the heat of the energy fields on his face like the breath of some immense slumbering beast. In that frozen moment, as the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, a flicker of realization danced across Grant's battle-scarred face. His cybernetic hand clenched, servos whirring, as the terrible truth crystallized in his mind like jagged shards of ice. There was only one path forward, one desperate gamble that might just save them all from the looming shadow of the Kux. "Patel, do you read me?" Grant barked into his comlink, his voice raw and urgent. "Loud and clear, Captain," came the reply, static crackling across the connection. "Listen carefully. I need you to get to Uko. Tell him everything we've learned about the Kux. Convince him that the only way any of us survive this is together." There was a pause, heavy with the weight of the impossible task. "Understood, sir. I'll make it happen." Grant turned to Stevens, the big man's face grim and determined beneath his battle-scarred helmet. "We need to buy them time. Let's get this power core rigged to blow. We'll lure Zara and her quark straight into the jaws of hell." Stevens nodded, his heavy plasma cannon already humming with barely restrained power. "Right behind you, Captain. Let's send these bastards back to whatever black hole they crawled out of." In the depths of the base, Patel raced through the twisting corridors, his heart pounding in his chest. He burst into the makeshift brig where Uko was held, the Lemnorian warlord shackled and seething with barely contained rage. Patel stepped forward, his dark eyes blazing with intensity. "The truth, Uko, the truth about the Quarks and how they've been playing us all for fools." He laid it all out, every scrap of intel, every whispered rumor and intercepted transmission. Uko listened, his posture shifting from hostile to wary, then to something almost resembling respect. "You expect me to believe this, to trust you, my sworn enemy?" His voice was low, dangerous. Before Patel could respond, a shimmering figure materialized in the cell. Zara, her pale skin writhing with eldritch energies. "Oh, but you should believe it, dear Uko," she purred, her voice dripping with mockery. "You've been nothing more than a pawn in our great game, a disposable tool to be used and discarded at our whim." Uko roared, straining against his bonds, his exoskeleton creaking with the effort. Zara laughed, cold and cruel. "Struggle all you want, it changes nothing. The Kux will feast on the life force of this galaxy, and there's nothing you or your pathetic new allies can do to stop us." With a final contemptuous sneer, she vanished, leaving Uko and Patel alone in the humming silence of the brig. For a long moment, the two warriors stared at each other, the weight of their shared revelation hanging heavy in the air. Then, slowly, Uko dipped his head, a gesture of grudging respect. "Release me, human. If what you say is true, then we have a common enemy, and the Lemnorian Imperium does not forget a slight against its honor. We will have our vengeance." Patel stepped forward, his fingers already working at the shackles. Truce, then. Uko's mandibles twitched in what might have been a smile. Truce, until the Kaks are nothing more than a fading memory. High above, in the thrumming heart of the power core, Grant and Stevens worked feverishly, rewiring conduits and bypassing fail-safes. The plan was desperate, audacious, but it was the only chance they had. "All right, that should do it," Grant said, stepping back from the pulsing mass of the core. "When Zara and her Quacks come for their prize, they'll find nothing but a supernova waiting to greet them." As if on cue, alarms blared throughout the base, red light strobing off the metal walls. Grant's comlink crackled to life, Patel's voice terse and urgent. "Captain, they're coming. Zara's leading a full Quacks assault force. They'll be at the power core in minutes." Grant shared a look with Stevens, a moment of perfect understanding passing between the two warriors. This was it, the moment of truth. They took up positions on either side of the core, weapons primed and ready. The doors to the chamber hissed open, and the Kaks poured in, Zara at their head, her pale face twisted in a mask of cruel anticipation. "Fools," she hissed, her eyes falling on Grant and Stevens. "You think you can stand against the might of the Kaks?" On cue, Uko burst into the chamber, Patel and a squad of Lemnorian and human soldiers at his back. Plasma fire filled the air as the two sides clashed, the chamber erupting into a whirlwind of desperate close-quarters combat. In the heart of the chaos, Grant and Zara faced off, their eyes locked, their wills clashing like titans. Around them, the power core thrummed and pulsed, the trap set, the bait laid out. The fate of the galaxy would be decided here, amidst the blood and fire and fury of this final desperate battle. And as Grant charged forward to meet his foe, he knew that whatever the outcome, he would face it as he always had, with courage, with resolve, and with the unbreakable will of humanity at his back. In the heart of Forge Base, the power core chamber had become a crucible of chaos and destruction. The once pristine walls were scorched and pitted, the air thick with the stench of burning metal and seared flesh. Grant and Uko stood back to back, a bastion of defiance against the onslaught of Cox warriors. Grant's cybernetic arm whirred and clicked as he parried a flurry of blows from a Cox soldier, its chitinous exoskeleton gleaming in the pulsing light of the power core. With a swift, precise strike, he shattered the creature's faceplate, sending it reeling back into the seething mass of bodies. Beside him, Uko roared with savage joy as he tore through the Kaks ranks, his plasma blade carving a path of molten destruction. The Lemnorian's exoskeleton was battered and scorched, but still he fought on, his strength and fury seeming to grow with each fallen foe. Around them, the combined forces of humanity and the Lemnorian Imperium fought with desperate valor, their weapons flashing and sparking in the gloom. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds crisscrossed the chamber, felling Kaks warriors in sprays of viscous ichor. Suddenly a new sound cut through the din of battle, the hiss and crackle of static, followed by a voice strong and clear. It was Patel, his words echoing from every comm system and loudspeaker in the base. "Say attention, all Lemnorian forces," he said, his tone urgent and commanding. "You have been deceived. The Kaks are not your allies, but your oppressors. They have manipulated you, used you as pawns in their game of galactic domination." As Patel's message continued, revealing the full extent of the Kaks' treachery, a ripple of confusion and anger spread through the Lemnorian ranks. Some, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief, lowered their weapons, staring at their Quacks overlords with newfound horror. Others, their faces twisted with rage, turned their fury upon the Kaks, joining the humans in their desperate struggle. Grant and Uko, seizing the moment of chaos, pressed their advantage. They surged forward, their weapons flashing, cutting down Kaks warriors with ruthless efficiency. Step by step, they pushed the enemy back, their allies rallying around them in a tide of righteous fury. But just as victory seemed within grasp, a new horror emerged from the shadows. Zara, her face a mask of twisted glee, stood atop a raised platform, her arms outstretched in malevolent exultation. Behind her, rising from the depths of the power core like some nightmarish leviathan, was a monstrosity beyond imagining. It was a fusion of flesh and metal, a grotesque amalgamation of Quack's technology and twisted Lemnorian biology. Its body pulsed with sickly, unnatural life, writhing tendrils and chitinous plates melding in a blasphemous parody of life. And at its heart, pulsing with an unholy radiance, was the power core itself, now subsumed into the creature's very being. "Behold," Zara cried, her voice ringing with maniacal triumph, "the Devourer, the instrument of your destruction." As she spoke, the Devourer began to move, its massive form uncoiling from the depths of the power core. It lashed out with tendrils of crackling energy, drawing the very life force from the air around it. With each passing second, it grew larger, more powerful, an unstoppable juggernaut of hunger and rage. Grant and Uko, their faces grim with determination, rallied their forces for one final desperate assault. They knew that if the Devourer was not stopped, if it was allowed to feed and grow unchecked, then all hope for the galaxy would be lost. As one, they charged forward, weapons blazing, their battle cries echoing through the chamber. They would fight to their last breath, would give everything they had to stop this abomination. For the fate of the galaxy, for the future of all life, they would not fail. The final battle had begun, and the fate of worlds hung in the balance. As the Devourer reared up, its monstrous form blocking out the pulsing light of the power core, Grant and Uko charged forward, weapons blazing. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds slammed into the creature's chitinous hide, but they might as well have been throwing pebbles for all the effect they had. "So it's no use," Uko roared, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "Our weapons can't penetrate its armor." Grant gritted his teeth, his mind racing. They needed a new plan, and fast. His eyes fell on the power core, its energy fields fluctuating wildly as the battle raged around it. "Stevens," he barked into his comm, "can you overload the core? We need a massive energy surge to weaken this thing's defenses." "On it, Captain," came the reply, Stevens' voice strained with effort. "Just buy me some time." Grant and Uko redoubled their efforts, dodging the Devourer's lashing tendrils and snapping jaws, pouring fire into its armor in a desperate bid to keep its attention focused on them. Suddenly the power core flared with blinding intensity, its containment field shattering under the force of Stevens' override. A massive wave of energy erupted from the core, washing over the Devourer in a cascade of crackling lightning. The monster screamed, an ungodly sound that shook the very foundations of the base. Its armor cracked and split, unable to withstand the surge of raw power. Smoke poured from the gaps in its plating, the stench of burning flesh filling the air. Uko wasted no time. With a roar of triumph, he leapt onto the Devourer's back, his clawed hands tearing at the weakened armor. His exoskeleton whined with the strain, but he did not relent, ripping and tearing until a gaping hole was torn in the creature's hide. Grant lunged forward, snatching up a fallen plasma rifle. He leveled the weapon at the exposed flesh, his finger tightening on the trigger. The rifle kicked in his hands, a searing burst of plasma lancing into the Devourer's body. The effect was immediate and devastating. The plasma burst tore through the monster's internal organs, boiling flesh and shattering bone. The Devourer convulsed, its limbs flailing in agony. It let out one final, piteous wail before collapsing, its massive form crashing to the floor in a heap of twisted metal and charred meat. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the hiss of cooling plasma and the ragged breathing of the survivors. But the reprieve was short-lived. From the shadows, Zara emerged, her pale face twisted in a mask of rage and hatred. Her eyes fell on the fallen form of the Devourer, and she let out a shriek of anguish and fury. "You fools!" she screamed, her voice raw with emotion. "You think you've won? You've only sealed your own doom." She lunged at Grant, a crackling blade of energy materializing in her hand. Grant barely had time to raise his rifle before she was upon him, her blade clashing against the weapon's barrel in a shower of sparks. Around them, the battle raged on, human and Lemnorian fighting side by side against the remaining Quox forces. But for Grant and Zara, there was only the dance of blade and gun, the final, desperate struggle between two leaders, two enemies, two ideals. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and only one of them would walk away from this fight. Grant stared into Zara's eyes, seeing the madness and desperation that lurked there, and knew that he would fight to his last breath to ensure that it was not her. The ground shook, and the walls buckled as explosions ripped through Forge Base, the power core's catastrophic overload tearing the facility apart. Uko, his exoskeleton battered and scorched, rallied the surviving humans and Lemnorians, herding them towards the hangar bay. "Move, you wretches!" he bellowed, his voice cutting through the cacophony of destruction. "We don't have much time." Amidst the chaos, Grant and Zara's duel raged on, their battle carrying them from the ruined power core chamber into the crumbling corridors of the base. Zara lashed out with blasts of psionic energy, the air crackling with the force of her fury. Grant ducked and wove, his damaged cybernetic arms sparking as he evaded her attacks. With a snarl, he launched himself at Zara, his fist connecting with her jaw in a brutal uppercut. She staggered back, wiping blood from her lip with the back of her hand. "You fool," she spat, her eyes burning with hatred. "You think you can stop the Cox? We are the future of this galaxy." Grant pressed his advantage, raining down blows on Zara's defenses. "Your kind brings only death and suffering," he growled, his voice raw with exertion. "The galaxy will never submit to your tyranny." As they fought, the walls around them began to give way, huge chunks of debris crashing down from the ceiling. Grant and Zara's duel carried them into the hangar bay, where Uko and the survivors were making their desperate escape. Zara, seeing her chance, unleashed a barrage of psionic blasts, forcing Grant back towards the hangar's edge. He teetered on the brink, the ground far below yawning like a hungry maw. "It ends here, human," Zara hissed, her hand outstretched, ready to deliver the final blow. Grant's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening with resolve. "Not yet," he said, his voice low and dangerous. With a final, desperate surge of strength, Grant launched himself at Zara, tackling her in a furious embrace. They grappled with each other, locked in a deadly struggle, as they tumbled over the edge of the hangar bay, plummeting towards the planet's surface far below. The wind whipped at their faces as they fell, the ground rushing up to meet them with terrifying speed. Zara clawed at Grant, her fingers tearing at his flesh, but he refused to let go, his grip on her unbreakable. They hit the ground with a bone-shattering impact, their bodies rolling and tumbling across the rocky terrain. When at last they came to a stop, Grant lay atop Zara, his cybernetic hand wrapped around her throat. "Yield," he growled, his face inches from hers. "It's over." But Zara only laughed, a harsh gurgling sound that bubbled up from her ruined throat. "Over?" she rasped, her voice a mere whisper. "This is only the beginning, human. The Karks are coming, and there is nothing you can do to stop them." With a final shuddering breath, Zara went limp, her eyes staring sightlessly at the sky above. Grant staggered to his feet, his body battered and broken, but his spirit unbroken. He looked up at the burning wreckage of Forge Base, watching as Uko's ship rose from the flames, carrying the survivors to safety. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. Grant knew that the Cox would come, that they would bring the full might of their ancient and terrible power to bear on the galaxy, but he also knew that humanity would not face this threat alone. As he limped away from the ruined base, Grant's thoughts turned to the future, to the alliances that would need to be forged and the battles that would need to be fought. The road ahead would be long and hard, but he was ready to face it, ready to do whatever it took to protect his people and his way of life. The wind screamed in Grant's ears as he plummeted through the planet's atmosphere, his body locked in a deadly embrace with Zara. The ground rushed up to meet them, a blur of jagged rocks and scorched earth, the remnants of their cataclysmic battle scarring the surface below. Amidst the howling gale, Grant could feel Zara's claws tearing at his flesh, her eyes blazing with unquenchable hatred. They traded blows as they fell, each impact sending shockwaves through their battered bodies. High above, Uko and the surviving ships watched in horror as Forge Base erupted in a massive conflagration, the shockwave buffeting their hulls and sending debris hurtling through the void. The once proud Lemnorian warships limped away from the devastation, their crews stunned by the magnitude of the destruction they had wrought. But Grant had no time to dwell on the larger implications of the battle. His entire focus was on the desperate struggle at hand, on surviving the next moment. With a surge of strength, he wrenched one arm free from Zara's grasp, his cybernetic fingers closing around her throat. Zara snarled in defiance, her own hands scrabbling for purchase on Grant's armor. They spiraled through the air, locked in a deadly dance, as the ground rushed ever closer. At the last possible moment, Grant activated the emergency thruster in his cybernetic arm. The sudden burst of acceleration tore him free from Zara's grip, sending her tumbling away, her screams of rage and frustration swallowed by the roaring wind. Grant hit the ground hard, his enhanced body absorbing the worst of the impact. Pain lanced through every nerve ending, his vision swimming with black spots. He lay there for a long moment, his chest heaving as he gulped down lungfuls of acrid, smoke-filled air. Slowly, agonizingly, he pushed himself to his feet. His armor was scorched and dented, his skin bruised and bleeding beneath. But he was alive. He had survived. A short distance away, he saw Zara's crumpled form lying amidst the rubble. The once mighty Kux leader was reduced to a broken heap, her limbs twisted at unnatural angles, her eyes staring sightlessly at the war-torn sky. Grant staggered over to her, his steps heavy with exhaustion and pain. He looked down at his fallen foe, a mix of emotions warring within him. Relief that the immediate threat had been quelled, sorrow for the countless lives lost in the conflict, and a grim sense of foreboding, knowing that this was but one battle in a war that was far from over. Around him, the landscape was a blasted ruin. The once mighty Lemnorian base reduced to smouldering wreckage. The cost of victory had been high, perhaps too high. The Lemnorian Empire, a force that had once held the galaxy in an iron grip, now lay shattered and divided, its people reeling from the revelation of the Cux's betrayal. And the Galactic Council, the governing body that had for so long maintained a tenuous peace among the stars, had been shaken to its very core. The ancient, malevolent forces that lurked in the shadows had been dragged into the light, and nothing would ever be the same. As the surviving ships limped back to Earth, Grant could only wonder what new challenges and threats the future would bring. The war was far from over, and humanity would need to be ready for whatever came next. But for now, as he stood amidst the ruins of the battlefield, Grant allowed himself a moment of solace. Through great sacrifice, through courage and determination and sheer bloody-mindedness, he and his allies had struck a blow for freedom. They had shown that the indomitable spirit of humanity, the will to fight and endure against all odds, would never be extinguished. The road ahead would be long and hard, but Grant knew that he and his people would face it as they always had, with hope in their hearts and steel in their spines. The fight for the future had only just begun. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.